You look at a map, and you see names. Lemster, the Pine Barrens, a quiet suburban street. You see roads, forests, and houses, and you assume they are just places. You believe in the mundane reality of geography. But have you ever driven through a small town and felt the smiles of the locals were a performance? Have you ever stood in a real forest so silent you felt like you were being listened to? That chilling sense that the history of a house is not just in its walls, but in its memory. The following accounts explore what happens when the places you can find on a map are actually hunting grounds, and that nagging feeling of paranoia is the only warning you'll ever get. I've always been arrogant about nature, believing that any mystery it held could be explained, catalogued, and debunked. It was in that spirit that I went to the Pine Barrens in New Jersey on Halloween night. The local legend talks about the Jersey Devil, but my target was something more subtle. The whispers that hikers sometimes reported, sounds that seemed to move between the pine trees and the sandy undergrowth. My theory was a combination of wind being funneled through the trees and perhaps the calls of some rare nocturnal bird. I set up my equipment in a remote clearing. 3 high-sensitivity parabolic microphones aimed north, west, and east. I was confident, smiling into the darkness as I activated the recording. If a twig snapped in that forest, I was going to hear it. The first hour was predictably uneventful. The forest was just a forest, a gentle symphony of crickets, of wind rustling through the pines, and the distant hoot of an owl. I recorded the beautiful sounds of a barred owl, and what I presumed was a deer moving through the undergrowth. Nothing that sounded like it was whispering my darkest secrets. Even so, the vastness of the silence between the natural sounds was humbling. The solitude began to set in, making me feel very, very small. An hour later, 5 minutes past midnight, something changed. It wasn't a sound that startled me, but the absence of it. Everything stopped. The crickets went silent. The wind died. The forest held its breath, and the silence was so absolute that it felt like a physical pressure against my eardrums. My own breathing sounded like a hurricane. It was then that a new sound began, faint at first, coming from the western microphone. It was a soft, rhythmic scraping. It was the exact sound of my own fingernails nervously tapping against the plastic casing of my equipment, a habit I didn't even realize I had until I heard the forest playing it back to me. My arrogant smile vanished. The sound had stopped the moment I recognized it and ceased my tapping. My first reaction was to search for a logical explanation, a feedback loop, a strange echo from the dense trees to the west. But the acoustics of the place didn't support that theory. The sound was too clean, too close. A cold, analytical fear replaced my bravado. I decided to try something, to create a control variable. I leaned close to my recorder and clicked my tongue 3 times, slowly and deliberately. The sound was sharp in the silence. Then I waited. 2 full minutes of absolute silence passed. My breathing was shallow. I was just about to dismiss the event as a bizarre coincidence when the sound returned. It was the 3 clicks, identical to mine in every way, the pitch, the cadence, the volume. But this time, they came from the north, a completely different direction. It was not an echo. An echo doesn't wait 2 minutes and then move. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was a response. The forest, or the thing in the forest, wasn't just making noise. It was listening. It was learning. I sat frozen, my mind refusing to process what was happening. Then, a new sound began, a soft whirring from the east. It was my camera's lens motor, auto-focusing. I hadn't touched the camera. The thing was dissecting me, mimicking my gear piece by piece. The silence that followed was heavier and more menacing than before. It knew I was afraid. It was feeding on it. I waited for what felt like an eternity for the next mockery. When the sound finally came, it emanated from all 3 microphones at once, a perfectly synchronized sound wave that converged on my location. It was a voice, and it was mine. A perfect, chilling replica of the words I had spoken with such arrogance a few hours before. Let's debunk a myth, shall we? The experiment was over. A frantic panic took over, and I began throwing my equipment into my pack with clumsy movements. I had to get out of there. This wasn't a myth. It was intelligent. It was hostile. The silence as I packed was its victory lap. I left the microphones behind. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted to feel the gravel of the service road under my feet, to see the headlights of another car, to hear a voice that wasn't my own being used as a weapon against me. I shouldered my pack and ran, plunging into the undergrowth without a thought for the trail, branches whipping my face in the darkness. It was then that the voice started again. It was still mine, but the tone had changed. It was no longer mocking me. It was pitying. "You were never going to be enough, Maya," it whispered, seeming to rise from the rustling leaves at my feet. Then the voice changed, shifting into a perfect replica of my father's. "You always take on more than you can handle." It was a line from my last conversation with him before he passed away, a memory so private I had never spoken it aloud to anyone. Tears streamed down my face as my lungs burned. The entity wasn't just in the forest, it was in my head, pulling out my worst fears and weaving them into the landscape. Up ahead I saw a faint, bobbing light and heard a sound that made me stop dead. It was my own voice, raw with panic, screaming for help. "Help me, I'm over here." It was a lure. I turned to run the other way, but my headlamp caught something on the path in front of me. It was my parabolic microphone from the north, propped upright. Beyond it stood the one from the west, and beyond that, the one from the east, arranged in a perfect, deliberate line, showing me the path it wanted me to take. It wasn't a path. It was a cage. My own technology, the tools I'd brought to capture and explain the world, had been turned against me to trap me within it. The choice it gave me was no choice at all. Run toward the sound of my own voice, screaming, or walk the path it had laid for me. Both led to the same destination. A strange, cold calm washed over me. The hunt was over. I stopped running. My final thought was a warning for anyone who might find my recorder. Don't come here. The legend is real, but it's not a ghost. It's the place itself. It's a predator. It learns you, breaks you down, and then it feeds. Behind me, a new sound began. The heavy, deliberate snap of a thick branch, followed by another. Something large was moving, no longer trying to be quiet. The voices faded, replaced by a low, guttural humming that vibrated through the soles of my boots. It was coming for me. This was my last recording, my final piece of data. Let the world know what I saw. The humming grew louder, joined by a wet, dragging sound, like something immense being pulled through the leaf litter. The ground itself seemed to ripple, the soil and dead leaves churning as if stirred from below. My final breath was a choked whisper. "It's not in the forest." My body went limp, and my hand dropped the recorder. The last thing I registered was a dizzying view of the tree canopy, twisting and swirling against the moonlit sky, moving not with the wind, but like the sinews of a vast, unholy mouth closing in. The final sound was a sickening, wet, crushing noise. Then silence. This had to be the most boring place on Earth. My dead grandmother's attic. My mission was to pack up a lifetime of what seemed to be, well, mostly junk. As I sifted through boxes of yellowed linens and forgotten Christmas decorations, I found something that at least promised to be more interesting. a cardboard box filled with old VHS tapes, the sacred family archives. I picked one up, a smirk playing on my lips as I read the faded label, Halloween 1998. Another read, Halloween 1999. Grammy must have been a huge fan. I figured they had to be gold mines of cringe, so I dragged a prehistoric television with a built-in VCR up from the basement. I was going to take a little journey into the awkward past of the Jenkins clan. I slotted the 1998 tape into the VCR and pressed play. The screen flickered to life with grainy, low-resolution footage of a living room I vaguely recognized. Adults in clumsy costumes were laughing. Music was playing. It was exactly what I expected. I chuckled at my Uncle Rob's fake mustache. As the camera panned across the room, however, I paused the tape. "Who's the creepy kid?" I murmured to myself. In the background, partially obscured by a doorway, a small child stood perfectly still. They were wearing a cheap-looking faded orange jumpsuit and an oversized pumpkin mask with a blank, painted-on smile. I shrugged it off and kept watching. The kid appeared in a few other shots, always in the background, never playing, just watching. I put in the next tape, 1999. It was more of the same. Same house, different year, same awkward costumes, and the same kid in the same pumpkin mask, this time standing a little closer to whoever was holding the camera. I fast-forwarded through most of it until the end of the tape. The party was over, the room was empty, and the camera had been left on a table, recording a static shot of the empty living room. Then, from the side of the frame, the small figure in the pumpkin mask walked slowly into the center of the room. It stopped and stood there for almost a full minute, staring directly at the camera. Then very slowly, it raised one small hand and waved. I flinched back from the television. The mocking smirk was gone from my face, replaced by a knot of genuine unease. There was no way. My hand shaking, I grabbed the remote and rewound the last few seconds of the tape. I played it again. The empty room, the slow walk, the silent staring mask, and the wave. It happened exactly the same way. It wasn't a glitch. It was a deliberate, chilling gesture, aimed at the person who would be watching 2 decades later. "Okay, that's officially creepy," I whispered. The fun of the project was gone, replaced by a morbid need to understand. A knot tightened in my stomach. This wasn't just a weird family quirk. Something was wrong. I ejected the tape and put in the next one, Halloween 2000. The party was smaller this time. The adults seemed more subdued, their laughter forced. The pumpkin-masked child was there, of course. They appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, watching my mother talk to the camera. They stood in the hall as my cousins ran past. No one ever spoke to them. No one ever seemed to notice they were there at all. It was like they were a ghost, a glitch in the family's reality that everyone had collectively agreed to ignore. I moved through the tapes faster, now. 2001. The child was standing right behind my grandmother's armchair. 2002. The footage was dark, underlit. There were only a handful of people at the party. The child spent most of the video standing beside the person holding the camera, just at the edge of the frame. A constant, silent presence. A cold dread was creeping up my spine. There was a story here, an ugly one, and I was watching it unfold out of order. I took a deep breath and slid the next tape into the VCR. The label was faded but clear. Halloween 2003. I pressed play. The screen flickered, then turned a solid empty blue. I fast-forwarded the entire tape. It was blank. A blank tape. An entire year. Erased. Whatever happened on Halloween 2003 was so bad that my family decided it was better to have a hole in our history than to have a record of it. My blood ran cold. The creepy kid in the mask, the subdued parties, the silent waving. It was all connected to this missing year, this black hole in my family's memory. I rummaged frantically through the cardboard box, hoping for another tape, a mislabeled one, anything. But there was only one left. Halloween 2004. My hands were trembling as I put it in the VCR. I wasn't laughing anymore. I was terrified of what I would find. The tape flickered to life. There was no party this time. The footage was bright, shot during the daytime. The living room was quiet, almost sterile. The camera was steady, set up on a tripod. The video showed my grandmother sitting on the couch next to a little girl with pigtails and a cartoon t-shirt. It took me a second to realize I was looking at myself, at maybe 5 or 6 years old. My heart hammered against my ribs. In the video, my grandmother was speaking in a soft, soothing voice. "And you don't remember anything from the party, sweetie?" she asked. The little girl on the screen just shook her head. My own memories of that time were a blur, a foggy, indistinct landscape. I watched the screen mesmerized as my grandmother kept asking gentle questions about the game I used to play, about the costume I used to love. The camera operator, probably my mom, walked over to the hallway closet and opened it. She pulled out the familiar faded orange jumpsuit, and then the mask, the cheap plastic pumpkin mask, with its empty eyes and its horrible, painted-on smile. She placed it on the floor next to me on the couch. My grandmother pointed at it. "Can you show me, Samara?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Can you show me it was just a game?" On the screen, the little girl, me, picked up the mask. She stared at it for a long moment before looking directly into the camera lens. My own thoughts were a choked, horrified whisper. "I don't remember this. I don't remember any of this." The recording showed the 5-year-old me slowly lifting the mask, placing it over my own face for a moment, and then taking it off again, staring into the camera with an expression I didn't recognize. I hit stop on the VCR. The television screen went black, but the image of my own small, serious face was burned into my mind. It was me. All those years, in all those tapes. The silent, creepy figure in the background wasn't a stranger or a ghost. It was me. And the missing year, the blank tape from 2003, wasn't a family tragedy I had witnessed. It was a trauma I had caused. The memories, suppressed for 2 decades, came flooding back in disjointed, terrifying flashes. The feel of the plastic mask against my face, the muffled sound of the party outside, the game I used to play, where I would stand perfectly still until the other children would forget I was there. I remembered the secret I told my grandmother that year, the one that made her cry and call my parents. I had told her the man in the pumpkin patch told me to wear the mask so he'd have eyes inside the house. I finally understood the way my family had always treated me, with that gentle, cautious distance, the worried glances, the abrupt changes in conversation whenever I brought up Halloween's past. It wasn't because they were trying to protect me from a bad memory. They were trying to protect themselves, and everyone else, from me. The box of tapes wasn't a nostalgic collection. It was evidence, a record of my condition, kept by a grandmother who was too afraid to destroy it and too terrified to watch it. This attic wasn't just a place for storage. It was a cage for a story they never wanted told. The cynical, sarcastic girl who started this project was gone, replaced by a stranger with a monstrous past. I wasn't just Samara Jenkins anymore. I was also the child in the pumpkin mask. I didn't know where one ended and the other began. I looked down and saw the mask itself resting beside me on the floor, brought up from some forgotten closet without me even realizing I'd done it. I picked it up. It felt familiar in my hands. I held it up, its blank, smiling face, a perfect mirror. The tapes show that I took the mask off, I thought, my mind hollowed out by the revelation. But I don't remember. I don't ever remember being the one to put it on. My hands moved on their own, lifting the old plastic to my face, and the world went black. From an anthropological standpoint, Leominster, New Hampshire, was a fascinating cultural artifact. I walked its quiet main street on Halloween afternoon, my mind already composing the opening lines of my paper. My subject was the annual Harvest Festival, a ritual I found delightfully archaic, where the entire community participated in what they called the Night of the Watchers. The tradition dictated that every resident, from child to elder, must dress as a scarecrow. They believed these figures protected the town from the harsh mountain winters, ensuring a bountiful harvest by warding off, well, the specifics were deliberately vague, which is precisely what I found so compelling. The town itself was a portrait of rustic charm during the day, nestled in the forested hills of Sullivan County. But as dusk settled, the atmosphere shifted. The decorative scarecrows propped on porches were now indistinguishable from the residents who emerged from their homes, all clad in burlap masks and straw-stuffed clothing. I stood near the town hall, the sole person in civilian attire, an observer documenting the strange, silent migration. There was no music, no laughter, just the soft, collective rustle of straw as the figures moved to take their positions. They lined the streets, stood in dark alleyways, and perched on stone walls, their heads all turning in unsettling unison toward the setting sun. I had intended to watch the climax of the festival from the window of my rented house on the edge of town, but when I tried to leave the square, I found my way blocked. The street I had walked down was now a silent corridor of watchers, standing shoulder to shoulder. I turned down a side street, hoping for a different route. It too was lined with the silent masked figures. A cold knot of unease began to form in my stomach. This wasn't a parade, it was a deployment. I approached one of the figures, a tall scarecrow with a crudely painted smile. "Excuse me," I said, my voice unnaturally loud. "I'm just trying to get back to the old Miller house." The figure did not move. It did not speak. It did not even seem to breathe. Its head, a lumpy burlap sack, slowly tilted down to look at me. I recoiled, as if I'd been struck. The movement was slow, deliberate, and utterly impossible. It wasn't a person shifting their weight. It was a thing of straw and burlap, articulating in a way that defied physics. My academic curiosity evaporated, replaced by a surge of pure animal adrenaline. I turned and walked, quickly at first, then breaking into a jog, my mind a frantic internal monologue of disbelief. They're not static, they're responsive. I tried another street, and then an alleyway, but the result was the same. A silent wall of burlap and straw, blocking my path. Every exit was sealed. The town had become a cage, and I was the specimen rattling its bars. The detached observer had become the observed. I could feel hundreds of button eyes following my frantic movements. The air grew thick with a terrible, silent consensus. This was the ritual. I was the centerpiece. My outsider status, the very thing that gave me my academic objectivity, had marked me. I finally understood the terror of true folklore. It wasn't a story to be studied, but a reality to be survived. I wasn't here to document their tradition. I was brought here to be a part of it. I ducked into a deep, recessed doorway, pressing myself into the shadows, trying to make myself small. My heart was a frantic drum against the silence. I peered around the edge of the doorway, looking back at the line of watchers on the main street. They were still unmoving, their forms silhouetted against the harvest moon. For a fleeting second, I allowed myself to hope that if I stayed hidden, if I waited long enough, they would disperse, that this was all just an elaborate, terrifying prank. But then, the figure at the far end of the street took a single, stiff step forward. Then the next one in the line did the same, and then the next, and the next. A silent, synchronized wave of movement as the entire line of scarecrows began to advance down the street, their shuffling footsteps the only sound in the dead, quiet air. Panic is a poor navigator. I ran blindly through a disorienting maze of back alleys, the soft, dry shuffle of 100 pursuing feet echoing from the cobblestones behind me. My academic mind was gone, replaced by the raw, singular thought of survival. They're herding me, forcing me toward the center of the town. The logic was inescapable. This was a hunt, and the entire town was the snare. I saw an old heavy oak door on the side of the Lemster Town Hall. It was unlocked. I threw myself inside, slammed the door shut, and slid the heavy iron bolt into place. For a moment, there was silence. Blessed, absolute silence. The shuffling from outside had stopped. I was in a large, dark room, filled with the ghostly shapes of folded tables and stacked chairs. Moonlight streamed through the tall, arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the still air. I leaned against the door, my body trembling, my mind racing. This was a nightmare, a collective psychosis. These were just people. They couldn't be a part of this. My rational mind desperately tried to reassert control. That's when I heard it, a soft rustle coming from the far side of the room, behind a podium. I froze, my blood turning to ice. I was not alone. The watchers weren't just outside. They had been waiting for me in here, too. Slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was smaller than the others, and it moved with a strange, fluid grace. It stopped in a patch of moonlight, and with a movement that was unnervingly human, it reached up with two straw-like hands and pulled off its burlap mask. It was the woman from the general store, the one who had given me directions when I'd arrived. She was smiling, a warm, pleasant smile that did not reach her cold, placid eyes. "The harvest was poor this year, Dr. Chen," she said, her voice as calm as if she were commenting on the weather. "The earth requires a knowledgeable sacrifice." My mind, the one thing I had always trusted, the instrument of my entire life's work, had betrayed me. It had led me to this place, to this precise moment, not as an observer, but as the specimen. The woman's words hung in the air, a simple, horrifying statement of fact. My knowledge was not my shield. It was the quality of the offering. Behind her, other figures stirred in the darkness, their burlap faces turning toward me. Outside, the shuffling stopped. A heavy, splintering crack echoed through the room as the oak door began to give way under the silent, immense pressure of the crowd. It burst inward, and the room filled with watchers, a silent, rustling tide of straw and burlap. My voice was gone. My academic curiosity was gone. Everything was gone, except for the cold, stark terror of the end. Hands made of rough canvas and packed straw grabbed my arms and legs. They were impossibly strong. I was lifted from the floor, my feet dangling uselessly. I felt myself being carried out of the building, through the silent streets and into the cold, open air of the fields beyond the town. The last sensation was not one of violence, but of ritual. I felt the heavy, wet thud of a thick wooden post being driven deep into the earth. I felt my own clothes being torn away, replaced by the scratch of fresh burlap against my skin. I felt the whisper of dry straw being packed around my limbs, binding me to the wood. Then, a final, chilling silence, broken only by the sound of the autumn wind as it began to whistle through a new motionless figure standing guard over the harvested fields. And so, these accounts come to an end, leaving a few questions to haunt you. After hearing these stories, could you truly trust being an outsider in a small, isolated town you found on a map? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. We read every single one. See you in the next one.